Great. So thank you again, both of you, Andrew and Henri, for the presentations. And I just want to ask something before we throw it out to the audience. And it's something, obviously you're both photographing in the dark, which is interesting. And, Effie talked about disguise. And even though I don't think you mentioned it this time, I've heard you talk before when you talked about disappearing into the night and the idea of getting lost as well, I think you both refer to somewhat. So what is this, can you say something about this thing about when we're all trying to become visible, this thing of trying to be invisible or becoming invisible and being in the night? Is there anything, that you can reflect on with that?
I think the way I'm using the sense of invisibility is, the idea of the flânerie, I suppose, is even for men to be invisible. So you will have this power of observation, non-end. But when it comes to women, it is a necessity. You become invisible as a woman. Yes? You occupy space as closer to as a man. This is the closest it can take you to this form of invisibility, that you can occupy space in your own terms and be able to look, really. It is about looking and seeing. Gaze, to all the gaze.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I think for me, I was in a context which was a male context of working at night. And the fact that I was treading there, I was driving to this remote context on my own. And actually, where you have no phone signal, and I think, goodness, if my car breaks down, I'm slightly screwed. But I felt a safety in it. I think that sense of, I felt a safety in the night and a power of being with the night. And I actually felt really empowered by it because I suppose, well, there's two things. One is my history as a photographer. And, I wanted to be in the art world. I wanted to, do all these things when I went to the RCA, did all this stuff. Then left and then realised, this is really hard and competitive and I don't know that it's what I want to do. But going to Kielder was, and being in the darkness and being in I felt calm, and I felt that I was able to practice and to contribute to an organisation, but contribute to by becoming, taking on another role. And that's very much to do with the imagination as well. So in the darkness, I was able to imagine, and that's what my sound was about. So early photographers, like Ansel Adams talks about how he pre-visualized through the camera, or like before taking an image, and would think about how the landscape's going to look. And I did that. So I became that person, imagining and having that power over it, I suppose. But also it not being there, it not being completely my decision. So when the audience would say their own thoughts about the work, it gave them power. And I think that's really important as well. It became more of a dialogue and opened up photography. I don't know if that answers the question, but...
Yeah, that's great. And it refers to an article that I remember, I think it was the late 90s, that Val Williams wrote, which was called Where Women Dare to Tread. And it was about women photographers, obviously. And I don't know if either of you had read that, but it's an interesting reference to what you're talking about, daring to be in a particular space. And both of you in the dark, but you also in a scientific organisation. So that was really interesting. I don't know if people have some questions. There's one here.
Hi, thank you so much for your talks. I really enjoyed them in different ways. Effie, I really liked what you said. I think you made this question saying, who does the city belong to? I think that's how you phrased it. Is that how you phrased it? Who does the city belong to? And then you said claiming agency. I really enjoyed that idea that the city does not belong to us. You know, it does not belong to women photographers. And I don't remember your name, sorry. The stargazing.
Helen.
Yeah, Helen, yeah, sorry. Last Saturday I went to the stargazing club to ride my son into the stargazing, and the man there was explaining to me like all these very weird equipment that I need to buy to get my son to stargaze. And I was really, when he actually found out that I'm actually a photographer, he went down like a big list of what technical equipment I need to do this stuff. And then I thought, oh no, I'm not interested at all. And now I understand why I'm not interested at all. So to go back to, and the last lady, I'm sorry, I have this problem with names. I don't know.
Joannerie.
Yes. She talked about a language. And going back to you, Effie, do you think we can claim a language? And also, Helen, do you think we can claim a kind of language that we can talk about these, you know, spaces that they're not ours and reclaim them, or claim them? Yeah. And how?
I think so. I think that's what I try to do in my work. I think it's funny, isn't it? Because there is this sense of the invisible or disappearing, but I felt humbled by the environment. And in certain contexts, the gender felt like it mattered initially. There were lots of men working at the organisation, but it was then led by a female CEO, and there were lots of women working there. So it was a funny thing. It wasn't about my gender, really. It was about the fact that I was a creative practitioner disrupting that space. And you know, it never came up that I was female, I've got to say. Whereas in the art world, I think it's come up, my class has come up, for instance. So I think that in that context, it wasn't actually relevant. It was more kind of, you know, they were just like, oh, Helen's doing bonkers things again. And I'm doing another project with them now, where I'm working with refugees and high school kids because there were gaps in my work, the voices I had. And it was about learning to know each other, I suppose. And I've forgotten the original question, and I've gone off on a massive tangent. But yeah.
Reclaiming the space.
Reclaim. I think I felt I did. It didn't feel like it mattered. And as a teacher, this is what I say as well. I think it's difficult because, of course, it's different for different people, and it's different in different contexts. But I felt I reclaimed the space by moving away from a traditional space for making and disseminating images, and I felt fine. I felt happy.
I think I'm going to answer with the previous answer. You're claiming space, you're reclaiming space through the gaze. When you own the gaze, that's the way you reclaiming space. And as I said, by the body, the physical experience of the body, you know, tracing and mapping the space is the ultimate way of reinventing or reclaiming the space, although, you know, it is built purposely, you know, under the ideas of men, really ideas. Of course, you know, now we have more architects, city planners, the more women they involved in deciding what the social, you know, the public space looks like, the better. But the gaze is the important thing, to have the not authority, yes, to look.
Thanks. Some more questions. One here.
Hi, my name is Angela Svarono. I'm a photographer. Thank you all so much for the interesting perspectives. And I wanted to ask Effie something which actually comes from my own practice. As I did my master's in photography at the LCC in London back in 2003 and 2004, I started taking photographs at night. What I found was I didn't feel so much threatened as a woman, but I found that a lot of public space wasn't actually as public as I thought. So, for example, I was photographing near Liverpool Street Station, and some security guy told me to leave because this apparently was private, although it was like a square. And then I was photographing in Hackney, and I had some policemen coming and warning me about how dangerous it is to photograph at 3 a.m. in Hackney. I don't know if I was wondering if you had the same experiences, if you think it would be different as a man. I mean, if as a man you wouldn't be warned by the police, or I don't know if there's a gender thing, or if it's just a photographer problem.
I think you're raising two different issues here, and the one is that really in London in particular, the public space is often not public, it's private. So you being stopped all the time for recording, photographing, and especially when you're filming. I realized, because I went with a friend once, because they wanted to film me working, we couldn't go almost anywhere. With a very small camera and, this kind of gorilla, be quick and efficient, is doable. As for the stations, as you say, Liverpool Street Station, I mean, this is the ultimate safe places for photographing. Yes. Which I've used a lot as well, precisely for this reason.
Yes, but then we're not going to the East in Hackney in a normal setting.
If you go, at least for me, in my experience in the past, if you're going further away from the main, station, so where, the crowd is, because like a form of protection, then is a different story. And I would argue, I don't know whether it's a male or female, or just female experience, that actually there are places that they're almost, how to call them, haunted, in terms of, as if buildings, I know it sounds metaphysical, but I think it is important that as the buildings absorb and then reflect the people's histories that they have. It has happened to me several times, either because you have the feeling without seeing that it is a dangerous place, and then later on I found out that indeed this was a dodgy place, or places that they are charged, yes, areas that they're really charged of histories of the past, dark stories of the past, or whatever. But it's a totally different experience to stick around an underground station and to start walking around without direction, actually, too.
Yeah, and actually, as an afterthought, sorry, I won't take up more of your time, but I think maybe night photography kind of makes a woman photographer and a male photographer converge in a way. I don't know, I think I felt powerful photographing at night with my heavy tripod, which I felt could be used as a weapon. So maybe it could be an empowering practice as well, I'm just saying. Thank you.
It is, absolutely is empowering. We are weaponized, the classic thing about the camera. What I'm arguing is that to achieve this kind of normality in the public space, so as to be able to do it, at least myself, I had to play down my, looking, how can I put it? In theory, you have to be dressed the way, whatever you want, and to be free to enjoy, wandering around the public space. That is my point.
And of course now we have to be frightened of the police as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
I
maybe.
had this bit in my talk. I took it out because I think.
Yeah. Sorry? Well, because there's been there's been a lot of attacks by police people on women in. I think they're mostly in London. Well, some very high-profile ones. Maybe not a lot, but there have been enough to make you worried.
Hi. Is it okay for me to add to that? So my name's Nicola, I'm a criminologist. I'm here because I'm interested in gender-based violence and, the topics here. But just to pick up on that, in 2021, there was a girl who was walking. I'm sure this was part of your presentation. Perhaps you excluded it, Effie. But she was walking through a park and she was murdered by a police officer, and there are some other cases. Sabina Nessa, again in 2021, who was murdered for walking. And it also makes me think about your question and the police stopping you in the evening. Still we have this discourse of stranger danger, of if you were attacked, you being blamed for being in that public space at night. What were you doing? You ended your presentation, Effie, with the Reclaim the Night image from the 1970s. We still have these Reclaim the Night protests and what, because unfortunately they are still needed. And I'm thinking of the work of a criminologist she's called Fiona Vera Gray, and in 2021 she wrote a book called Trading Freedom for Safety, where she looks at how, the right amount of panic, how women trade freedom for safety. And she looks at sexual violence, sexual harassment, pornography, and women's experience of, using public spaces. And I see all these connections with my work in criminology and gender-based violence. So thank you.
No, thank you for raising it, because the point is that at the end of the day, the figure of the flaneur, or the idea, the concept of the flaneur, as very well Baudelaire at the beginning saw, and then Benjamin, brilliant analyzed, the flaneur is out there in the marketplace, or later in the predecessor of the spectator, and then the consumer. And actually, all these alter egos, in terms, from the beginning, is very much associated with the writer, the artist, the painter of modern line. And one of the things that really made me feel so strongly, because reading the description of the flaneur by Baudelaire, is as if I was reading about a figure, it was yet to come, which was the street photographer. This idea of grabbing the ephemeral, but I have to find my thread again, is the thing that we, even men or women, the moment you have a camera, you are armed, as you said, with a camera. You have no direction, but you have a reason to be out there. You're going there with something. You want you're working some way. You're grabbing slices of reality. As a writer, or Sylvia Plath says, is missing, She wants to be like, with her invisibility clock, to hear what they're saying, to listen uninterrupted, to have material. Where is really even more problematic, because when you're in this frame of mind, you're much more aware. Where Sarah, yes, she walks. from a friend's house to her house. I mean, we're talking about something more than basic. And somebody can argue, as usual, it's not one-off. No, it's not one-off. This is exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. Can I add something? Just to say, this is not the experience I felt. And I think the type of space matters, the type of darkness. Like, it's really dark in Kielder. You put your hand out and you can't see it. People walk their dogs at night. And you know, women. It depends on what the space is and what the context is as well. I didn't feel unsafe, apart from if my car broke down. I didn't feel, you know, I actually stayed there for 5 nights on my own in the observatory, just before COVID, and I didn't feel, I suppose my imagination played games, because I was pre-visualizing, but I didn't feel unsafe. And I travelled from Manchester to Kielder, which was 2.5 hours there and back on my own quite a lot, and then worked on my own. So there's different contexts for this as a discussion, and I think darkness means different things in different places. So just wanted to add that.
Hi, yeah, maybe a quick comment. Yes, here. Hi, thank you so much for the panel and for the stories and sharing them. I love that you brought up the question of safety and talked a bit about that, because you both have different spaces you're working in, the city and the nature. And I remember I had a discussion with a friend who loves to go out in nature, and I've always been a bit afraid of being alone in the nature. And I remember her saying that, but you don't have to be scared of anything in the nature. You have to be scared of people, of men usually. And throughout this panel, I was thinking about a question that Clara asked yesterday. I think that Clara was here today. Hi. You raised the comment on care being connected to security. And I was thinking about this issue as well, because the whole story of this conference is about security, securing women's names in the history of photography. That's caring for their stories and them being seen. But in this panel, we see again a different aspect of it, of the security of being seen, like security in being seen, like masking yourself and putting on this disguise and everything, and security from a different point of view. So I don't know if you have any maybe feelings or associations of this aspect of care as well. And actually the last slide you had, Effie, on men being swept out of the streets, I guess I wouldn't want to sweep them out of the streets. I would want them to do the work. I would want them to do the work, the care work, because there's a lot of women here these days talking about security of securing our names in the histories of photography, securing our presence in contemporary art, and security of feeling secure and safe of being seen. So I would really want them to participate in the care work. I don't know if you maybe have any comments on this. Thank you.
Yes, I think, I'm sorry, I think I take it goes without saying that it is, the last slide is quite, humorous, and talks about what I'm saying, again, taking to an extreme. Of course, it's not about sweeping men out of the street, but it's about a patriarchal order, yes, where, how can I put it in other words? The city, it is a dangerous place, one way or the other, but the danger comes 99% from men. Men to women, men to men, that is my point. Not sweep them out, but how can we create a space that we all can be out there.
Then there's one over here.
Okay, I'll just go ahead. So I think some of the things I wanted to talk about has been very well put by Liga, especially the last slide. I had a thing about that. But firstly, to begin with, extremely alluring pieces of work by both of you. And when you brought back Rembrandt in the end, something that I was thinking even when I was looking at Effie's work is a very, and this might be a bias, but a very 17th century, that mode of chiaroscuro, that play of shadows and lights that was so prominent in your work, and that creates such an alluring impact for both of your work. So thank you for sharing that with us. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was with respect to the last slide, sweeping of the feet, and I understand the extremeness of that whole point, but something that I have struggled with in terms of feminist thought or methodologies to approach is in our demands for security, and I have been a little bit skeptical of the idea of security because it comes often in a very patriarchal mold of securing women's safety, which then gets rendered in rhetorics of honor and things like that. In this whole idea of security and safety and care, how do we place desire? What happens to women's desires? And with that, the desire to take risks, the desires for transgression. What if a woman wants to be in the dark with another man on the streets? In the whole discourse on security, I feel some of these conversations get lost, and I struggle with how to bring them back in or how to approach them. One of the books that really helped, and it also addresses some of the things of spaces, speciality that we're talking about how spaces are not public, is this book by a group of women authors in India, sociologists and otherwise, called Why Loiter? And that book talks about how loitering can be a feminist move to reclaim spaces, loitering without purpose. You don't have to have a camera to justify your presence in the streets, or you don't have to have a bag to justify your presence. You can just loiter around. So that was the first question. And the second question is to Helen. You ended your thing or you mentioned in one of the things that you did not feel your gender to be as relevant at one point. And your talk is titled Demasculinizing Astrophysics. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about this, maybe a sense of tension or paradox that you see there. And also when you showed the images of the stars, the Crab Nebula, you talked about this otherworldliness in the images. How do you read a masculinist or a male gaze in those images? Can you talk a little bit more about that? How in those imaginations can we locate that masculinist gaze? Yeah, those two.
Sure. Thank you for your questions. Just in a way to just answer kind of both questions about the security and care. A big part of what I did was about finding security as a creative practitioner and not working within traditional systems of, publishing or perhaps exhibiting in a particular way, but working with an organisation that is interested in people and using my shared values as a curious person to work there. And actually it's meant that it's led to more work for me. So it's led to more security as a female practitioner. And that's the key part of the project, really. And not a lot of it began when I started the project about, I'm looking from a female space. But actually, quite quickly, it became about more of an equality in that sense, and that I moved away from that. And it was more about doing the work and finding security and finding space for myself as a practitioner. And I feel as a teacher, it's really important as well, because what I don't want to do is put students out into the world and say, go for this opportunity, go for that opportunity, and there's limited space. So I'm expanding the field of practice of how someone can use creative photography to work. I think that's really interesting. And to answer your other question about, yes, about feeling safe in the space, but also demasculinizing astrophotography, what I mean, it was a bit of a, you know, with the sense of other worlds, the gaze of space has been defined by men. So the historical images that I've shown with Draper and Commons were the men who, you know, developed photography as a medium, and quite often the first thing was photographed was the moon. So that was very much a male gaze at space. So by demasculinizing space, I didn't photograph it. I wasn't interested in it. I photographed, there are no stars in my images. I've got no interest in that. My interest was pointing the camera at the observer, so and actually excluding what they see. You know, what is this masculine image of the cosmos, which is just copied constantly and is all, you know, is on everything. It's just ubiquitous. So I was like, no, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the act of observation and having the power as a photographer observing. And it is, so it's you know, it is about, it's just about rethinking and rehabbing that kind of, that gaze, I suppose, and opening it up. But I weirdly, I felt that at the beginning it was really important that it was a female rethinking of this. But then as I went along, it became less important. It was more about the fact that I was there. And I think having the power of even rethinking art systems as well, which quite often have a lot of men in them, and, you know, rethinking of how that works and finding my own way. And I was thrilled that it worked and I enjoyed it. So I hope that answers your question.
So, I'm not going to go to the safe and the safety and care, because I think they're quite different. Protection, you know, like state protection from care, and they're two different things. And as a matter of fact, I wouldn't, personally, I don't want to have a state, an organized state that is mainly male organized to protect me. I'm talking about something much more fundamental, because there, if you ask protection of this sort, can easily become something, you know, edgy, you know, and you can get into like a Kafkaesque. But what I'm interested in, what you said about desire, and it's precisely my point. When you say, you know, what a woman wants at night out there, is precisely what a man wants out there at night. And I think in the male desire, at least sexual desire, has been totally being looked after. Yes, and one of the alter egos of the flaneur, that is a prostitute, which I think is the most unfortunate, you know, like romanticized again by men, including Baudelaire in like the Passant or even the surrealist Breton. Excuse me, the prostitute is working out in the streets. She is not out there as a writer, as a poet, as a rag picker, or as a beggar. Yes? Because this is, you know, lots of the alter egos of the flaneur. And actually, I was reading recently an article, and unfortunately, I don't remember the woman, that I found very interesting because it started cataloging the flaneuses somehow, that we call them invisible. And apart from the prostitute, which is the classic, is the widow. Who was talking about the widows? You know, the luxury of being a widow is the widow. Is the young girl, I don't know how was that. It's the old woman and the murder victim, which is mainly women. So my answer to you is, where is female desire? That is my question. In the same way that men, what they want out at night. why the women can't claim the space.
We have time for one more question. I know that was a dramatic point. Oh, Sabina, okay. Two more questions.
So I find them both really interesting. One for being in that space that you'd previously considered a male space, like astrophysics, which could be argued as just like photography. But in terms of being out in the street at night, I've often, as part of material culture, I've put my photographs into the street at night. And it's particularly poignant for me because Belfast is a post-conflict city. And the violence of men is inscribed on the walls all over the city. There's murals everywhere with them holding guns. There's, you know, drawn graffiti penises all over the place. And the very first time I did the wheat pasting with a colleague, it was of Savita Halapanavar, who just died because she couldn't access abortion in Ireland. The second time, I had a sideways mouth and this cunt bites back the night before the biggest arts festival in Belfast. And even though we have these pictures of violence and guns and penises in our face every single day, 42 of 50 of those posters were all ripped down before the arts festival opened the next day. I had a colleague who put up a street art painting of a woman who was bleeding, who had her period, and commissioned by a period homeless charity. And within 24 hours, 2 unnamed men came and blacked out that image on the streets of Belfast. So there's active censorship of women being in the streets, not just physically, but being represented in urban streets at night. And then the last one, where I knew I needed those pictures to stay up for a long time, and I knew I needed them to be in significant places in Belfast, I grabbed the collective. And that's how we get our power back in the streets. It's about the collective. It's about calling upon our sisters. You know, sisters, what can you see coming, etc. And one side note, which is slightly comedy, there are ways that women are invisible, and one of them is pushing a pram. So I have also been invisible and wheat pasted across the streets. A police car has followed us at night when we've done it before, because it's a civil offence. But during the day with my pram, because I had a 7-month-old baby and it was the only time I could do it, nobody noticed me. Nobody cared. Nobody gave a toss that I was doing criminal activity on the streets. And when I dropped my leaflets at one point, somebody helped. Oh, here you go, and walked on. So yeah.
That is exactly what, what's her name, yes. You need, you know, that's why women carry something or push something.
Thank you. This isn't really a question. It's just I was thinking. I mean, I've also been thinking about this issue of care and, you know, precarity, care, and I was thinking that one way of kind of layering this dialogue is by actually moving away from polarities. Because the moment you get into polarities and you say, okay, here is the discourse around the good woman who is not supposed to be on the street and the streetwalker who is supposed to be on the street, and we look at the streetwalker as part of the feminist movement as well. For the longest time, the streetwalker, the sex worker, has never been part of a certain kind of feminist discourse. I mean, in India especially, for a long time, they were just not considered to be part of the movement. I mean, you know, they didn't till they actually said, look, we're here to stay, we've come into the movement of our own volition, and we demand the right to be on the streets. Very often, the so-called patriarchal state is actually, can be women as well. So the police that oppresses the sex worker is very often the woman, policewoman, who is actually very, very harsh with the sex worker. And when we talk about female desire, or we talk about female desire and wanting to be on the street with a man, it could be 2 men who want to be on the street and who are equally vulnerable. We take on who are equally vulnerable. You know, when there are two men who could be on the streets, they could be equally vulnerable. We take on different kinds of identities at different points of time. There is female masculinity. I mean, there could be a day when I'm feeling really femme and I dress in a particular way, and I think one of you spoke about it. And then there are days when I, want to take on a kind of a different kind of a persona. And we also take on these different identities at different points in time. So perhaps if we move away from that polarity, then perhaps we have a richer discussion, perhaps.
Absolutely. I think, we have to it's a very short talk, and things are very complex, but it's a polarity if you want. I don't try to create, on the contrary, that's the word I don't want to do somehow, but there is nevertheless some evidence, and even what you say, that can apply, to other minorities usually, yes, men to men, but I'm saying from the beginning that usually violence comes from men, whether it applies to women or men, okay, and all other form of minorities or marginalized groups, they all, have problems, but usually the source comes from men, as well as the prostitutes, by definition is, as I said, why prostitutes exist? They fulfill male needs. I don't believe that prostitutes became prostitutes for their own pleasure. And that is why it's a trade. Money are involved. It becomes a work, yes? That's why I feel that it is quite romanticized and unfortunate the way it has been even becomes a heroic, or if you want to, with Baudelaire and the Romantics, or whatever, where the idea of the anti-hero starts existing in literature and elsewhere, sees this adoration, if you want. This is an anti-hero prototype as well, the prostitute. But I think it's again male projection there, honestly. Yes, I think it's very complex.
Can I just tell everybody that for the next panel, everybody needs the headphones because some of it will be in Greek, some of the questions. So everyone will need headphones. That's the way of the machine.